Why don't we talk about a player who's been on the Sabres for a very long time? In fact, if I'm not wrong, he's the second longest tenured Buffalo Sabre after Zemgus Girgensons. Let's talk about the captain of the Buffalo Sabres, Kyle Okposo. Okposo is 34 years old. He's 6 feet tall and 183 pounds. So not the biggest guy out there, but he does captain this team after all. He's in the final year of his massive 7-year, $42 million contract, which he signed all the way back in 2016, before hitting the market as an unrestricted free agent this summer. And despite being a veteran, the captain, and a long tenured player on the Sabres team, he's not guaranteed to be brought back by management next season. The Sabres have a lot of options, but let's take a look at what's most likely going to happen. Let's play devil's advocate for a second and think of the positives of letting Okposo walk. Per cap friendly, with the signing of Tage Thompson and Mattias Samuelsson, the Sabres will still have more than $18 million to deal with, which is why a lot of people were now saying, look, we need Okposo's mentorship back for a year or so. We can pretty much use him to go on a deep playoff run with more talent to accompany Jeff Skinner, Alex Tuch, and Tage Thompson. And considering how good the Sabres are doing in the standings, it seems very likely that they will get some players to join them this year. But his departure could be a very convenient one for the Sabres. Currently, many of their youngsters are approaching the end of their deal, such as Dylan Cousins, who's an RFA. Then a plethora of guys will have their contracts ending, such as Owen Power, Peyton Krebs, and Henrik Jokiharju in the following years, so the 2023-2024 season. So that's going to be a really, really big season for them. But right now, for the sake of this video, let's assume that the Sabres want most of those players to return. It would probably be best for the franchise to retain as much cap space as possible, even though Okposo would not command anything near his current salary on the future contract. We just have to admit that he's not a 7-year, $6 million guy anymore. Remember that he signed this contract back in 2016 when he was 27 years old, coming off a 64-point season with the Islanders. Ever since that season, he's declined further and further, particularly due to a poor Sabres team. But even this year, he has only 17 points in 37 games on a good Sabres team. Not a very good reason to maybe sign him for long or even keep him, for the matter of fact. But I think the Sabres personally owe him respect for being on this team for so many years, along with his veteran presence, which could seriously aid them if they make the playoffs, as they are in the hunt for a spot there. They will make some moves before the trade deadline to enhance the team, and whether Sabres fans like it or not, we will hear Okposo's name being called by March 3rd, as any postseason team would love to have a captain on their team, while minding the salary, of course. Remember that Okposo still carries a $6 million contract for one more year, and even asking for salary retention isn't worth it. We're talking about a guy who doesn't even have 20 points and is worth $6 million? David Pastrnak, who we just talked about, is making only $400K more than him, and he has triple the amount of points than Okposo. Not to mention how, as of right now, Rasmus Dahlin, Tage Thompson, and Alex Tuch all make less than Okposo, but have more points than him. Retaining the salary isn't the issue for the Sabres. It's finding a team that thinks his trade value is very high. But to be fair to Okposo, he did experience a revival last year, as he notched 45 points, with 21 of those being goals. His point total was the highest in 6 years, and fans took notice of it and were hopeful for the vintage Okposo to come back. I'm talking about the Okposo who was rocking with John Tavares in New York, leading the Islanders to a few playoff runs. If we take a look at teams like the Minnesota Wild, we would see how there are teams that can be a good fit for him. The Wild are a relatively young team that are in the midst of a tight playoff race in the Western Conference, which could use some upgrades during the deadline like Okposo himself. That could add to some bottom six scoring, and perhaps Okposo becomes an average 30 to 40 point player right there. But again, what I believe to be more realistic is that Buffalo makes their run for a playoff spot and do that with Okposo still in the Sabres jersey. He clearly means a lot to this team, as I've said over and over again. He's the captain, he's been in Buffalo for such a long time. He should have the right to make his own decision before management does. But if we look at his time in Buffalo on a large-scale standpoint, they didn't exactly get what they wanted. Let's go back to July of 2016 when Okposo leaves Long Island to Buffalo for the next 6 years. Tim Murray, who was the Sabres general manager back then, thinks that they've added a good 28-year-old player who's going to be a leader on and off the ice for this Buffalo team. They think that they have a veteran who can still play and put up 50-plus points like he had done in the past 3 seasons from 2013 to 2015 for the Islanders. But no, that did not happen. He was very good in his first 2 years in Buffalo, getting 45 and 44 points respectively, but he didn't get that high value due to numerous significant injuries, which limited his time on the ice and his potential for better performances, and this would be something that would affect him for the next 3 years until last year when he managed to get back on track and return to form. It should be interesting to see what Kevin Adams decides to do here. Things are very different in Buffalo, as we all know. The whole team just functions differently. Aside from OKPOSO coming back to his former self, we have a rebuild finally in success. This comes after countless failures in the past where we saw prospects failing and stars getting traded in Jack Eichel and Taylor Hall. We're seeing new stars being born as well as new faces emerge. This is a team that has finally assembled a young core of strong talent, and OKPOSO is the head honcho of it as he's the oldest skater on the team. With huge seasons from Tage Thompson and Rasmus Dahlin, it seems only fair to give some credit to the wisdom of Kyle OKPOSO for forming a positive and cohesive culture in the locker room, which was something the Sabres did not have, as we all saw with Jack Eichel and his press conference reaction when the Sabres beat the Knights in his return. If you remember that, he went along the lines of bullying the Sabres for being bad when he was there, but finally showing up just to beat him. Kind of being a cancer if you ask me, which is nothing like OKPOSO. But speaking of OKPOSO, with the Sabres inching closer and closer to the playoffs, it's very unlikely that the Sabres part way with their captain. But now there are some questions that remain. Where does OKPOSO go next year? Does he retire in Buffalo or somewhere else? And to answer these questions, we must consider some things. First of all, he's not necessarily in the twilight of his career yet, as he's 34 years old, but he turns 35 in April, and given his well-known injury status, it's very likely that he may not sustain as long as most are expecting. In other words, it's very difficult to tell how much longer he's going to be in the NHL. What we know right now is that he's very happy in Buffalo, and he's become a huge part of this team as he's been for the past 6 years, and the fans would want him back even if his production isn't that high anymore. If I were Kevin Adams, I would certainly bring back OKPOSO on a small deal, obviously getting paid less than he was getting paid back in 2016. The length of the contract would be a little hard to predict given his injury status, but assure yourself that this can only benefit Buffalo. It would be really fitting to see the captain retire in Buffalo, as this was a place where he had the biggest impact in. I know some people may say that he was better in Long Island as his production was better, his chemistry was better, but his impact on Buffalo is absolutely unmatched. We will see what comes on trade deadline day or maybe somewhat before that, but let me know your thoughts in the comments about the future of the Buffalo Sabres captain. Otherwise, thank you guys for tuning in and have a wonderful day.